Viewer discretion is encouraged because what you're about to hear is meant purely for entertainment. Imagine a television giant walking into a studio expecting nothing more than a relaxed conversation, the kind of interview he could breeze through with charm alone. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, also subscribe. That was Steve Harvey on an ordinary Tuesday morning, stepping onto the set of The View with his trademark confidence. His suit looked like polished midnight, his tie perfectly chosen, and his smile, a bright, practiced beam millions recognized, never wavered as he approached the stage. The audience exploded with applause the moment he appeared, the kind of roar reserved for someone who has lived in the spotlight long enough to feel at home inside it. He tugged at his jacket as he sat, settling into the guest chair with the quiet authority of someone who had played this game for decades. The hosts greeted him with enthusiasm. Whoopi Goldberg radiated her usual blend of authority and warmth. Sarah Haynes and Sunny Hostin welcomed him with easy smiles. Everything suggested a smooth conversation ahead, but then there was Joy Behar. Seated at the end of the table, she didn't mirror the other's friendliness. Her body was angled away, arms folded tight, eyes sharp and assessing. She watched him not as a guest to be celebrated, but as someone she was waiting to strike. Steve noticed her posture instantly. Years in entertainment had trained his instincts to detect danger before it arrived, but he dismissed the warning as nerves or pre-show tension. Cameras rolled. Whoopi's voice boomed with her familiar command, introducing Steve to another round of cheers. He thanked them with an easy grin and settled in as Sarah opened with a question about his new relationship book. This was familiar territory. Steve leaned forward, confident, charismatic, speaking about communication and the patterns he had observed from decades of interacting with couples from every walk of life. The audience nodded along, hanging on his words, fully absorbed in his rhythm. He spoke with humor, sincerity, and that unmistakable cadence that made people feel like he was speaking directly to them. But while the crowd responded warmly, Joy's expression stayed frozen. No nod, no smile, no reaction. She simply stared at him with a look so steady and unreadable that it split the atmosphere without a single word. When the camera cut to her, the tension sharpened. Something was coming, and everyone could feel it. Steve didn't see it yet. He continued explaining how relationships crumble when partners stop listening to one another, his voice smooth and sure. The audience murmured in agreement, then Joy finally moved. It wasn't dramatic, just the slightest lean forward, her hands folding on the table. But it changed the energy instantly. Even Whoopi's composure broke for a moment, as though she sensed the temperature in the room drop. Steve paused, instinctively aware that something had shifted. Joy inhaled slowly, as if preparing a blow she had been waiting to deliver. Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that cut through the studio lights. And in that moment, the interview he thought he was leading suddenly belonged to her. The warmth in the room evaporated. The easy laughter faded. Everyone, hosts, audience, crew, felt the air tighten like a wire pulled too far. Steve straightened his posture, the smile still there but edged with caution. For the first time that morning, he wasn't steering the moment. Joy opened her mouth, and even before the first word left her lips, it was clear this wasn't going to be a disagreement. It was going to be a confrontation, a live televised hit that would ignite debate for weeks and leave Steve Harvey, one of entertainment's most unshakable figures, fighting to keep control of an interview that had turned into psychological warfare before anyone realized the battle had begun. Joy's voice sliced through the studio with a calmness so sharp it felt like a blade. "Steve," she began, each syllable deliberate, "I've read your book, and I have to ask, do you really think you're qualified to tell anyone how to handle relationships when some of your own advice sounds, let's say, outdated?" The audience reacted with an audible shift, a few gasps, a few nervous laughs. The tension thickened instantly. Steve blinked once, buying himself a fraction of a second. Nobody on the panel had warned him this line of attack was coming. He kept his smile steady, though a flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. "Well, Joy," he answered lightly, "I'm just sharing what I've learned over the years. People can take it or leave it." Joy didn't blink. Her expression was unyielding, like she had spent the entire intro waiting for this exact moment. Take it or leave it, that's convenient, but you're presenting your opinions as if they're universal truths. Don't you think that's a little arrogant? The studio fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, zooming in just enough to catch the micro expressions crossing Steve's face. He wasn't just being questioned, he was being challenged. Directly, publicly, intentionally. Steve sat back slowly, recalibrating. He had dealt with hecklers, critics, unpredictable guests. He could handle this. "I'm speaking from experience," he replied, voice calm, steady. "People relate to real stories. I'm not forcing anything on anybody." Joy's laugh was short and humorless. Stories are one thing, but telling women what they should or shouldn't do in a relationship, acting like you've cracked some universal code, that's something else. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some supportive, some disapproving, all captivated. Whoopi shifted in her seat, her hands tightening around her note cards. She clearly wanted to intervene, but knew doing so too early would only pour gasoline on the fire. Sarah attempted a half smile, trying to diffuse the moment with a glance towards Sunny, but neither dared interrupt. This was no longer a group interview. It had turned into a duel. Steve kept his eyes locked on Joy, his expression neutral, but his voice carrying a weight that cut back through the tension. Joy, I've built my career on helping people laugh and helping them understand each other. I'm not attacking anybody. You don't have to attack anyone, Joy shot back. Your advice does it for you. Another stunned silence. Even the audience members leaning forward in their seats seemed to stop breathing. Steve's smile faded just enough for the shift to register on camera. His posture straightened. The easygoing persona slipped, replaced by a guarded calm. You clearly have a problem with me, he said, quietly but firmly. Joy didn't look away. I have a problem with ideas that tell women to shrink themselves to fit what someone else wants. A few claps erupted from the audience. A few boos countered. Suddenly, the studio felt less like a talk show and more like a courtroom with two lawyers circling each other. Steve exhaled, the kind of breath that signaled he was done playing defense. I don't tell anyone to shrink, he replied. I tell people to understand each other, that's all. Joy leaned back, still holding eye contact, her silence almost louder than her questions. Steve opened his mouth to continue, but the energy shifted once again, this time from the panel. Whoopi placed a hand on the table, a subtle sign she was stepping in. Her voice, calm but edged with steel, filled the tension-soaked room. All right, she said, her tone more command than suggestion. Let's all take a breath. Steve and Joy didn't move. The intensity between them lingered like static in the air. The audience waited, uncertain whether a ceasefire had truly begun or if this was only the eye of the storm. And in that fragile pause, Steve realized something he had never expected to feel on The View. He was no longer the one in control. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Whoopi's attempt to soften the moment barely held the tension together. The silence between Joy and Steve wasn't just lingering, it was expanding, like two storms pushing toward each other without any intention of changing course. Steve forced a slow smile, the kind meant to assure the audience that everything was fine, but the strain behind it was unmistakable. He adjusted his tie, not because it needed fixing, but because he needed something to do with his hands. Joy noticed. Her eyebrow lifted just slightly, as if she'd detected a crack in his armor. Look, Steve began carefully, his voice lower now, more serious. We're all entitled to our opinions. I'm not here to preach. I'm here to talk about what I've learned. Joy leaned forward again, her eyes narrowing. And what you've learned, she said, enunciating each word like she was driving a nail into the table, comes from a world where men get to decide what's acceptable behavior for women. That's my issue. The crowd reacted instantly. Some clapped, some groaned. Everyone felt the temperature spike again. Steve inhaled sharply, the sound picked up by his mic. You're twisting my words, he replied, the confident ease in his voice replaced with a firmer edge. I talk about respect, communication, understanding each other. That's it. You talk about rules, Joy countered. You talk about what a woman should do, what a man deserves, and how people need to play their roles. You package it as guidance, but it sounds like control. Steve opened his mouth, but shut it just as quickly, realizing anything he said too fast would be fuel for her next strike. He glanced toward Whoopi, hoping she would jump in again, but she simply watched, calm, unreadable, waiting to see if they could navigate this without her interference. Sunny shifted in her chair, a small sign of discomfort, while Sarah offered a nervous, diplomatic smile to nobody in particular. Steve finally spoke. Joy, I've helped a lot of people with my advice. People who reached out to me, people who thanked me for giving them clarity. I'm not out here hurting anybody, and I definitely don't need to control anybody. Joy kept her expression locked and cool. Intent doesn't erase impact. The words hit harder than her tone suggested. The audience collectively exhaled as if bracing themselves for Steve's response. Steve leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the smile gone now. He wasn't speaking as the entertainer anymore. This was the man behind the suit, the man who didn't appreciate being cornered. "You know what?" he said slowly. "I'm all for a debate. I can handle disagreement, but don't question my character on national television." Joy didn't flinch. "Then don't write things that make people question it." A sharp wave of noise burst from the audience. Steve sat back, momentarily stunned. It wasn't the comment itself, it was the precision of it. She didn't yell, she didn't mock. She delivered the line like a closing argument. A few people clapped, a few hissed, but the real reaction was written on Steve's face. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, his breathing steadied, and his jaw tightened. The cameras zoomed in, sensing the climax of the moment. Whoopi finally intervened again, this time with more force. "All right," she declared, her voice slicing through the noise. "Everybody relax, we're having a discussion, not a boxing match." Joy stayed silent but unyielding. Steve nodded, though the tension in his shoulders didn't loosen. The entire panel sat suspended in a fragile, uneasy stillness. The audience whispered among themselves, unsure of whose side to take or what might happen next. In that uneasy quiet, Steve realized something far more unsettling than Joy's attack. She wasn't trying to pick a fight. She was testing him, pushing him, studying every crack in his composure. And the show wasn't even halfway through. The real explosion hadn't happened yet. The quiet that settled over the studio wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that hums under the skin, the kind that comes before something snaps. Steve adjusted himself in the chair, one slow shift of posture meant to reassert control, but Joy's stare didn't allow him even that much ground. She sat perfectly still, a presence so solid and unwavering that it felt like she was holding the entire room hostage without lifting a finger. Whoopi tried to move the conversation forward with a safer question, something light, something unrelated, but the tension had taken root too deeply. The words floated out of her mouth and dropped straight to the floor. Nobody, not the audience, not the panel, not even Steve, was ready to pretend the confrontation hadn't happened. Steve cleared his throat and attempted to answer anyway, trying to force his rhythm back into the space, but the cadence of his voice no longer carried the effortless charm from earlier. His tone was lower, controlled, almost cautious, and every sentence was delivered like he was measuring the room before giving too much. But the moment he finished his answer, Joy pounced again, not loudly, not dramatically, but with clinical precision. "You skipped the part where you take responsibility," she said, tapping her finger lightly against her mug. "You talk about communication, but you completely dodge the specific criticisms people have about your book. Are you avoiding the subject?" Steve blinked hard. It wasn't just the challenge, it was the subtle accusation behind it. Avoiding, evading, hiding. On live television, that kind of implication hits like a slap. "I'm not avoiding anything," he said, his voice noticeably firmer. "I answered your question." "No," Joy replied calmly, "you talked around it." The audience made a noise that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a laugh, more like a collective "oh" bubbling up from every row. Steve sat forward sharply, elbows planted on his knees, eyes locked onto Joy, as if he finally understood that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. This was deliberate. "Joy," he said, the last of the humor draining from his voice, "I came here to have a conversation, not to be interrogated." "Then stop giving politician answers," she shot back before he even finished. That line landed like a bomb. The crowd reacted instantly, some cheering her on, others groaning in disbelief. Sarah's jaw dropped. Sunny's eyes widened. Even Whoopi shook her head with a sigh so heavy it practically vibrated the table. Steve raised both hands in a gesture meant to signal composure, but it only highlighted how much effort he was expending to stay calm. "I'm not a politician," he said tightly. "I'm a comedian and an author. I talk about life, real life." "Then talk plainly," Joy said, leaning in. "If you believe your advice is right, say it. If you think critics are wrong, say that too, but don't dance around it." Steve's mouth opened, then closed. The cameras zoomed closer, capturing every tense microsecond of the unfolding standoff. He wasn't losing his temper yet, but he was undeniably cornered, and Joy knew it. The audience waited, breaths held, sensing the moment he was about to snap or reclaim control. Steve took a deliberate breath, then spoke with a steadiness that sounded almost forced. "I don't owe anyone an apology for expressing my views. If people don't like them, they don't have to read my book. Simple as that." Joy nodded slowly, the first hint of a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "There it is," she murmured, almost to herself. "There's the real answer." Steve's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. She had been pushing him to reveal that exact moment of raw honesty, and now that he had, she looked satisfied. Not pleased, not vindictive, just satisfied, like she had accomplished her goal. Whoopi stepped in again, this time with more urgency. "Alright, we're taking a break," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension like a referee ending a round. The music swelled, the red lights dimmed, but the moment the cameras shut off, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The air still buzzed with everything unspoken, everything unresolved. Because even though the show paused, the clash between Steve and Joy wasn't over, not even close. If you like this video, then subscribe.